Chapter 7, The Risk Takers. The Risk Takers. The days of defending your present possessions and positions are gone forever. Therefore, from this day forward, you will never have to concern yourself with such problematic issues as maintaining your present job or keeping up your current standard of living. Instead, you will put the things which can go wrong on the defensive, and you will put the things which must go right in ready formation for attack. As of today, you are a dynamic, vigorous risk-taker whose eyes are always turned toward your strengths and assets, rather than toward your weaknesses and liabilities. Henceforth, you will wake up in the morning thinking only of the ways to do the things you want to do, rather than waking up thinking of all the reasons why you cannot do those things. As of today, you will think repeatedly of the many achievements which you are going to accomplish in the future that are vastly superior to anything you have ever done in the past. For clearly, these are the results that can only be obtained if you are first willing to take some kind of a risk. Believe me, once you undertake this process, it won't be long before you start winning, and in a big way. You should understand, however, that as you become increasingly involved in the risk-taking process, you will find yourself forced to draw upon resources which you previously didn't even realize you possessed. At first, this may prove to be very frightening to you. Nevertheless, you must always remember you will never hear of, read about, or see anyone who achieves anything of greatness in his or her own life without first taking some kind of a risk. As a case in point, just consider the monumental risk which all of our great religious leaders have undertaken during the course of their heroic lives. Then stop and reflect upon the enormous risks which all of our great business leaders have also undertaken during the span of their illustrious careers. Finally, as you seriously meditate upon these stupendous accomplishments, you will become increasingly aware of the fact that you too must become a risk-taker for you to develop the greatness you were born with. Moreover, you should understand that in truth, no genuine satisfaction in life can ever be attained by you or anyone else who simply refuses to take risks. For the life of anyone who chooses to live with extreme caution will never amount to anything more than a succession of dull, horrific days, continuing on without interruption. The diving board analogy. To help you grasp the full implication of what I am saying, consider the following analogy. Just cast your mind back to the time when you were a child and attempt to recall the degree to which you admired the neighborhood kid who went right up the ladder and dived off the high diving board without any hesitation whatsoever. Then see if you can recall the feelings which you harbored in yourself as you watched him take that first risky leap into the water below. If you are like most of us, you probably lost just a little bit of your own self-respect at that time, until finally, out of sheer embarrassment, you too mustered up enough courage to jump. Finally, see if you can recollect how good you felt once you actually made the plunge and proved to the world that you could do it too. Now that you have taken your mind on this mental journey through your past, bring it forward to the present time. Let it become fully aware of the legions of men and women today who, like the young child looking longingly at the high diving board, would dearly love to quit their jobs, set out on an independent path, and do their own thing. However, due to their overwhelming fear of failure, these unfortunate people never quite work up enough courage to step out and actually take the plunge. As a result, such individuals miss out on many of the opportunities that life affords them. And what is even sadder, they never get a chance to plumb the depths of their own innate resources. Since they are afraid they might not make it, afraid they might lose, afraid they might fail, they simply choose to maintain the status quo and do nothing. The irony is, however, that even if a person should assiduously attempt to avoid all this, he or she will still inevitably end up failing from time to time. But the point is, so what? What difference does it really make? After all, failing does not make us a failure, and the only time we do become a failure is when we decide to stop trying anymore. Therefore, even if we should falter along the way, we never really fail, because we always retain the capacity to try once more. Flip Wilson's story. Flip Wilson, the famous comedian, is best known for his ability to make people laugh. But here is what he said in a somewhat more serious vein about his own experience with the risk-taking process. I fell down and I got up. I fell down and I got up. For 16 years, I did practically nothing else but fall down and get up. Even so, do you think Flip Wilson ever thought of himself as a failure? You bet your life he didn't. For if he had, he would have never found the courage to try just one more time. And you and I probably would never even have heard his name. You should understand at this juncture that as soon as you seriously set a big goal for yourself, you are going to become involved in a process of risk-taking, which will add a dimension of excitement, indeed a whole new flavor to the course of your life. But at the same time, you should be aware that as you start engaging in more risk-taking behavior, the majority of people will be trying to avoid it at all costs. In other words, instead of taking meaningful risks, most people will continue to insure themselves in a series of empty compromises. These compromises, in turn, will ultimately have the effect of reducing their existence to the level of a meaningless charade. To understand how this phenomena operates, just consider the people whom you know who have compromised when buying their new home. Why did they compromise, you ask? Because they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to make the mortgage payments on that dream home they truly wanted to live in. Then turn your mind to the veritable army of individuals who remain in positions at work which they find dull and unrewarding. Why do they stay? Simply because they fear they would not be able to cope with the position which they would truly love to tackle. The irony is, of course, if these people would simply put themselves out on a limb by going after that better job or that dream home or whatever else it is they truly desire, they would then demand a commensurately better performance from themselves. As a result, they would soon discover that the risk they had taken was actually paying big dividends in all aspects of their life. The Young Millionaires. Several years ago, I read an excellent book on the subject of risk-taking. It was entitled The Young Millionaires, and it contained the true life stories of 18 individuals, each of whom had earned in excess of $1 million. In fact, some of these people had actually earned many millions of dollars over and above the $1 million mark during the course of their highly successful careers. Throughout the book, the author made many interesting observations about the law of financial success, but the most important one was the one which he kept coming back to, namely, although these individuals came from a variety of different backgrounds, and although each had earned their money in a different way, they all shared one thing in common. What was that one thing, you ask? Simply put, it was this. Even though everything they owned was riding on the outcome of virtually every major business decision which they made, none of them considered themselves to be taking risks. The reason they didn't, he went on to explain, was because they were living their lives as though it were impossible to fail. Note, however, that in the eyes of most people, there would be no question that these individuals were actually taking tremendous risks, and on an almost daily basis. Fighter pilot study. In a similar vein, research done many years ago, which investigated the lives of fighter pilots in World War II, determined conclusively that, contrary to what you might think, many of the pilots who played it safe during the war were among the first to be killed in combat. By way of contrast, the study also found that, practically without exception, not only were the surviving aces individuals who refused to play it safe, but they were the greatest risk takers throughout the war. Indeed, as one has the opportunity to observe the performance of individuals from all walks of life, it soon becomes evident that whoever plays it safe in life dies, and dies relatively young. For although many of these individuals remain clinically alive for numerous years, when their hearts finally cease beating, it is a mere formality, because the truth is they have never really lived. By now, you have probably said to yourself, all of this sounds eminently reasonable, but why should it be? Or, why are so many of us destined to go through our entire lives in this condition of self-imposed misery? Simply because we are unable or unwilling to take meaningful risks. Well, it seems to me, if we will only cast our minds back to the formative years of our own lives, we will soon recognize where this reluctance to engage in risk-taking behavior has its source. Once we have arrived at that point, I believe we will have come a long way in our attempt to combat and ultimately neutralize this insidious problem. I exhort you, therefore, to pay very strict attention to the information which will now be set out before you. When you were a young child, in fact, even as far back as the time when you were an infant, your parents desperately wanted to see you succeed. As a consequence of this wish, they were terrified by the prospect you might somehow fall short of their expectations of you. This was perfectly natural, in light of the fact they loved you very dearly. Unfortunately, however, it motivated them to attempt to shelter you from every potential harm which might come up in your life. For example, when you first started to walk, they were right by your side, and as soon as you even looked like you were going to stumble, they quickly grabbed onto you so you would not fall and hurt yourself. Similarly, when you engaged in your first fist fight with the little terror next door, your parents were there to soothe the bruised feelings. They probably tried to console you by saying, "You were right, dear, and the other wrong. The other child was a bully." Next, they probably said something like, "In the future, dear, be very careful, and try to stay away from the kids like that." Moreover, if your upbringing was typical of that of most of us, your first bicycle probably brought with it repeated warnings such as, "Be careful, don't fall, watch out," and so on. In this manner, you were slowly but surely programmed to make every move in your life with a brilliant caution light burning brightly on the screen of your impressionable young mind. You must gain the awareness, therefore, that regardless of what anyone may have told you to the contrary, none of us was ever born with a fear of taking risks. For as I have clearly indicated above, the fear of taking risks is something which we learn only after we entered this wonderful world of ours. In fact, contrary to what many people will have mistakenly been led to believe, the human being, if left to his or her own devices, is a born risk-taker who is naturally programmed to follow the path which will eventually lead to greatness in his or her own life. But be that as it may, before you embark on this exciting path of risk-taking, you should remember to never lose sight of the fact that becoming a risk-taker does not mean becoming an irresponsible individual. If you really think it through, you will realize these two concepts are mutually exclusive. For becoming a risk-taker means to act courageously, and to act courageously is considerably different from acting foolishly, which is how a person acts when he or she behaves in an irresponsible manner. You might encounter a few situations where the line separating these two concepts becomes extremely narrow. Nevertheless, it is absolutely essential you never cross over that line, inadvertently or otherwise. Another thing which you must be aware of is that risk-taking is always a relative term. In other words, behavior which represents a risk to one person may not necessarily represent a risk to another person. Moreover, if the same behavior were carried out by a third party, one might even be tempted to deem it irresponsible conduct. It is clear, therefore, that one must be able to distinguish among these different concepts with a significant degree of accuracy. In order to achieve this, it becomes necessary to go back to one of the basic principles involved in the process of self-development. You must be able to see with your inner eye yourself already in possession of the good you desire. Risk-taking versus irresponsibility. People who are irresponsible very rarely accomplish anything of importance, and quite often they invite real harm to themselves. They might occasionally become involved in some activities which are successful, but these results occur so infrequently, and they are so overshadowed by negative results, that they are hardly even worth mentioning. Consider, for example, the individual who dives off a high cliff and into a shallow body of water, simply because he has been dared to do so by a group of his peers. Although the person in question is afraid to dive for some strange reason, he is even more afraid of what the others might say to him, or even think about him if he chose not to dive. Clearly, the person's fear of diving is perfectly reasonable, in view of the fact he has had absolutely no training as a diver. Furthermore, as a result of his lack of training, when he does contemplate what might happen if he did dive, he visualizes himself being very seriously injured. Obviously, for an individual such as this to go ahead and dive would be extremely foolish, to say the least, and the person's actions would have to be considered irresponsible by anyone's standards. On the other hand, however, if this same person trained to become a professional diver, and if he were skilled at taking all of the various factors into consideration, for example, if he were able to visualize himself successfully going through all of the necessary motions, such as swimming to shore, stepping back on land unharmed, etc., then it would be a totally different situation. For although the person would still be taking a definite risk, no one could accuse him of acting in an irresponsible manner. Consider for a moment the stunt people who work in the movie industry. These individuals are constantly performing dangerous acts. In fact, that is precisely what they get paid for. But do not be deceived, for the men and women who perform these stunts are not amateurs by any means. They are all competent professionals, highly skilled in the performance of their dangerous trade. They always check and then double check every calculation before they make even the simplest move. As a result of these precautions, they are very rarely ever injured. No, there cannot be any question about it. Stunt people are risk takers, to be sure, but they are very rarely irresponsible individuals. Investments. Now turn your attention to the person who invests his or her hard-earned savings in a venture about which he or she knows practically nothing. Perhaps someone, possibly a relative whom the person may have held in high esteem, suggested this investment was a great idea, and the investor stood to earn an extraordinarily high rate of return on it. Assume, moreover, that despite the person's very grave misgivings about going into the venture at all, he is also being strongly motivated by greed to seek the highest possible rate of return which can be earned on the money invested. Finally, suppose that the tremendous fear of loss notwithstanding, the person decides to go ahead and make the investment anyway. What happens next? After the investment has been made, most of the person's waking hours will probably be spent, 1, worrying about the investment, and 2, visualizing himself reduced to a state of abject poverty. It is abundantly clear, therefore, that this sort of behavior must be deemed the polar opposite of financial responsibility, and the person involved must be considered imprudent and irresponsible rather than a bona fide risk-taker. The unusual outcome in a situation such as this is predictable, if not pleasing. The individual in question loses the money, not to mention the former friendship of the individual who originally suggested the investment. The reason is that foolish, irresponsible people seldom blame themselves for making such an error. On the other hand, however, if that person listened carefully to the suggestion of his friend or relative, and then studied the situation for himself, he could have formed an opinion which was based on sound knowledge rather than hearsay, and which was motivated by genuine interest rather than simple greed. At that point, the individual could have gone ahead and invested a sum of money which would not have placed his total financial situation in jeopardy. Then, as he gathered more information based on actual experience, He could have gradually increased his investment if such action appeared to be in his best interest. Clearly, if our hypothetical individual followed this second course of action, he would still certainly be taking a risk. However, one could not justifiably say he was behaving in the manner of a fool or an irresponsible person. Moreover, even in the eventuality that this person made a bad judgment call and lost his money, that would have been all he had lost, for he would still have his friendship, and he would still have his own self-respect, because he would realize he had been guilty of nothing more than an error in judgment. An added benefit of this second approach is that the individual would not automatically reject future investment possibilities should they arise. I am sure you are getting my message loud and clear. Risk takers are knowledgeable people who study situations carefully, have confidence in their own abilities, and have a very healthy self-image. Put more succinctly, we can say risk takers, unlike irresponsible people, are nobody's fool. Business failures. Consider this. If one were to examine the statistics regarding the number of business failures each year, without closely studying each situation separately, one could very easily conclude that going into business for oneself is an irresponsible act. However, that is just not the case. The truth of the matter is, many of the people who have gone into bankruptcy should never have gone into business for themselves in the first place, either because they weren't properly prepared for such an undertaking or because they simply didn't know what they were doing. They lacked the skill, the knowledge, or the proper support to get their businesses off the ground. Bear in mind that although it takes most new companies at least 3 years before they are properly established, some of these individuals didn't allow for 3 months or even 3 weeks to give their businesses a chance. It is also significant to note that prior to setting out on their own, many of these people were those employees who thought their boss was incompetent, or the owners of the company which employed them didn't know what they were doing. Obviously, everyone who fails to get a new business going does not fall into this category, but there are certainly many people who do. Nevertheless, despite the woeful statistics, there are certainly many individual risk takers who have succeeded in establishing businesses of their own. For example, just consider the story of my good friend Bob McCrary. Bob had worked in the electronics industry for many years, and although he had never earned what one might consider big money, he certainly earned a better than average income. He owned his own home, he raised 3 beautiful daughters, and accomplished all this while working for someone else. But despite his undisputed success, Bob harbored a desire to go into business for himself, and I suppose fear was the only thing holding him back from doing so. The truth of the matter was that with all the things he had going for him, Bob couldn't have helped but succeed. Unfortunately, however, he was unaware of this, because he had never been out on his own before. Moreover, he had been raised to believe the old idea that a person should get a steady job and then work for a pension. Still, the desire of Bob and his wife Pat to work in their own business persisted. It eventually grew to the point where they were actually able to visualize their business operating successfully. Since it is impossible to hold an image in the mind without also expressing it, the end result of Bob and Pat's imaging was the birth of their own company, Pensacola Electronics. That happy event occurred just a few short years ago, and although both Bob and Pat have worked many hard hours and still do today, they have the satisfaction of looking at what they have created together. They gainfully employ numerous people, and they properly service hundreds of clients located in various American states. They have both earned a sizable income, and the net value of their company today, if they were to sell it, is greater than all of the money Bob had earned working for the other company for all of those years. Did Bob and Pat make the right decision? Just ask them. Would they make it again? You know what their answer would be. Are they risk takers? I don't think there is any question about that. Bob and Pat McCrary left their jobs and invested many thousands of dollars to do something which they had never done before. They had no written guarantee they would succeed in their new venture, But they were not irresponsible, nor were they acting imprudently. Were they afraid? Well, I have never asked them directly, but after studying human nature for the greater part of 20 years, I feel quite confident in asserting they were. The salient point for our purposes, however, is despite their trepidation, they had the courage to act in the face of their fear. For the person who analyzes a situation carefully prepares himself accordingly, and then proceeds in the face of fear with the image of success in mind, is a genuine risk-taker. Furthermore, as you are already aware, risk-takers very rarely lose, and even when they do, they usually bounce right back to try again. In other words, risk-takers live exciting, creative lives because they are living the kind of life that we are all intended to live. So put a smile on your face, because as of this moment, you too can become a bona fide risk-taker. How? Simply by doing the thing you have dreamed about, off and on for months, or possibly even years. In the great musical, South Pacific, Mary Martin sang, "If you don't have a dream, if I don't have a dream, how are we going to make a dream come true?" It is my belief that every one of us has our own dream. We all have a vision, an idea, or a picture of some great or grand thing or accomplishment which will float to the surface of our consciousness from time to time. Moreover, for a few brief moments, we permit ourselves the luxury of enjoying ourselves doing, being, or having whatever that dream might be. There is no doubt in my mind that you too hold a picture of something which floats to the surface of your consciousness periodically, and if the truth were to be known, you would dearly love to execute that dream. Well, the simple truth is, you can. But in all likelihood, it is going to require a considerable amount of courage on your part. Remember, it makes no difference at this moment how bizarre your idea may appear. In fact, you might even regard it yourself as being sheer fantasy. Nevertheless, you can begin to turn it into a reality by making a written description of whatever it is you would like to do, have, or be. Write out your ambition in as much detail as possible and in the present tense. Do not write it out as something that you are planning to do. Rather, write it out as if it were something you are doing currently. In big bold letters, write "I can," and then yell it, say it, sing it, drill the idea that you are now going to do this thing into your subconscious mind. Then choose a friend who has a lot of confidence in you, someone whose thinking is compatible with your own, not someone who will put you down and laugh at your idea, to share your idea with. Select someone who will build you up and help instill confidence in you with respect to your idea. Remember, it makes no difference whether your goal is starting a new business, buying or building a new home, getting a new automobile, a new position at work, setting a sales record, or getting an honors mark in school. Whatever it may be, you must step out and boldly pursue it. Keep reminding yourself that you have tremendous reservoirs of potential within you, and therefore you are quite capable of doing almost anything you set your mind to. All you must do is figure out how you can do it, not whether or not you can. Begin to visualize yourself as a risk-taker, and then start telling yourself you are one. Become fully aware of the good vibrations you get, simply by virtue of practicing these simple mental exercises. But before you proceed any further with your quest, find yourself a pad and pen. Then prepare a balance sheet by taking an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and drawing a straight line down the center of the page. On the left-hand side, place a minus sign, and on the right-hand side, place a plus sign. Under the minus sign, write out the very worst thing that could happen to you if you were to follow through with your idea. On the right-hand side, write out all the good things, the very best things that could happen to you if you were to go ahead with your plan. Clearly understand that so long as what you plan to do is honest and honorable, whatever goes on the left-hand side of the page is not going to be disastrous. On the other hand, however, what goes on the right-hand side of the page could turn out to be absolutely magnificent. Therefore, by creating the balance sheet in this manner, you are demonstrating to yourself, for your own edification, the fact you actually have nothing to lose. It has already been brought to your attention numerous times in this book that simply missing the mark does not make you a failure. It only means that your plan did not work out as you had anticipated. So even if you should lose everything you own, you still retain the capacity to bounce back to try once again. For several years now, I have been in the habit of reading the biographies and autobiographies of men and women who have truly accomplished something of significance in their lifetime. I have found, moreover, that almost without exception, these individuals had fallen short of their goals on numerous occasions, but that never deterred them. Indeed, I myself have experienced failure to hit the mark on a number of occasions, and I will readily admit it hurts a little, and it even causes a certain amount of embarrassment. But be that as it may, it has never stopped me from trying again, and it need not stop you either, because we all possess the ability to get up and get going once again. Therefore, this very moment, make up your mind that you are going to become the risk-taker you truly wish to become. Chapter 8, The Razor's Edge. The razor's edge. You are only 1 inch, 1 step, 1 idea away from turning onto the boulevard of beauty in your own life. It has often been said, the line which separates winning from losing is as fine as a razor's edge, and it is. I am talking about winning in a big way and in all areas of your life. W. Somerset Maugham wrote an entire book entitled The Razor's Edge, and Darrell F. Zanuck spent $4 million producing a movie which had the same title. Both of these great men, author and movie maker alike, knew there wasn't a big difference among people. There was only a big difference in the things they accomplished. That was the theme of the movie as well as the book. One person just about starts a project, the other person starts it. One individual almost completes a task, the other does complete it. One person sees an opportunity, the other acts on it. One student nearly passes the exam, the other does pass it. And although the difference in their marks may be only 1 percentage point out of 100, it is that 1 point that makes all the difference. The annals of sports history are rich with dramatic illustrations of the razor's edge concept. For example, at the 1976 Olympic Games in Montreal, Canada, there were 8 finalists competing in the 100-meter dash. But the runner who won the Olympic gold medal was only 1/10 of a second faster than the runner who finished in last place. In 1947, Armed, the first racehorse in the history of United States racing to win over $1 million in prize money over the duration of his career, had earnings of $761,500. But the horse which finished second in earnings that same year, a horse which often lost races a mile long by only a nose, won only $75,000. Now, if one were to look at their winnings alone, it would appear that Armed was 13 times better than his closest competitor. However, when you compare the times that were actually registered by those 2 horses in their races, you discover he really wasn't even 4% superior. Now, you may have grown up with the idea that some people have it and some people don't, or because some people are much better off than others, they enjoy much more of the abundance of life. But I want you to understand right here and now, this idea is absolutely false. For you are every bit as good or as powerful as anyone you see, know, or even hear about. Remember, since the difference between them and you is only in the area of accomplishments, and since there is something you can do that will vastly improve the results you are achieving presently, you have the potential to become even more successful than they are. You may already know how to do what others are doing. If you don't, you can learn. And since your potential power is unlimited, you can do even greater things than they are now doing. The something which you must do to become more successful may not be what you think it is, but whatever it may be, rest assured you are quite capable of doing it. Always bear in mind, however, that because each person's world is just a little bit different from every other's, the something which you must do is not necessarily the same thing the person you live with or work with must do. Nevertheless, there is no question you will eventually find out what it is that you must do. So make up your mind immediately. When you do figure out what that razor's edge is for you, you will do it. Heinz Dawes' story. As I was writing this chapter, a very dear friend of mine, Heinz Dawes, telephoned to thank me for an idea I had given him. But before I let you in on what that idea was, permit me to give you some background information. Heinz Dawes works for a large insurance company in Toronto, and every October his company holds a contest which is referred to as a President's Month. All of the salespeople in the company gear themselves up for this contest, and they each perform at their peak level of productivity. Their reward, if they should win the contest, is both fame and fortune. The company always recognizes its proven leaders. As he does every year, Heinz had an exceptional President's Month. But in keeping with his practice of previous years, he was planning to relax a bit in November, or at least to revert to what he considered to be normal production. As I was talking to him one afternoon, however, I noticed that his usual high degree of enthusiasm had leveled off considerably. I knew something was amiss, so I asked him what was bothering him. He then explained he was experiencing a big letdown now that his big month had come to an end. In an attempt to raise Heinz's spirits, I asked him the following question. I said, Heinz, what would you do with the extra commission you would earn if you were to repeat your October performance in November? He actually earned 3 times his usual monthly income in October. Seeing the true meaning behind my question, Heinz's face brightened considerably, and a broad smile appeared across his face. Then I quickly added, we both know you are quite capable of repeating your October performance in November. There is absolutely no question about that. By this time, Heinz had become thoroughly convinced that not only was he capable of repeating his performance, but he definitely would repeat it. He said with his customary confidence and vigor fully restored, all right, Bob, I'm going to do it. The razor's edge. He did it. Heinz Dawes beat his own record of October in November. Think of the difference this will make in his annual income, not to mention his standing in the company. You just know he will duplicate or better his performance next November following President's Month. The something for Heinz Dawes turned out to be nothing more sophisticated than deciding to do the same thing in November which he had already done in October. Perhaps you are saying to yourself, anyone could have figured that out. You're right, they could have. But there are a few thousand people selling for the same company that Heinz sells for, and I'll bet you dollars to donuts there weren't 5 others who did. Vince Lombardi, former football coach of the outstanding Green Bay Packers football team, described the razor's edge concept in football very well when he said, most games are won or lost in the last 2 minutes of the first and second half. But what Lombardi is best remembered for with respect to football's razor's edge is the second effort concept, which he introduced for the edification of his players. In a nutshell, the second effort concept simply meant that when a player was initially stopped by the opposing team, he would always surge forward a second time with the added thrust of a second effort. Now just consider the tremendous difference you could create in your own life if you were to adopt a similar mental attitude. For example, if you're a person who is working in sales and currently selling only 3 units a week, what would the consequences be for you if you were to decide to make 1 additional sale per week? through a conscientious application of the second effort concept. Well, on a weekly basis, it might not appear to be a major breakthrough. However, viewed over the time frame of an entire career, it would actually amount to well over 2,000 extra sales. Moreover, from a monetary standpoint, it would mean you would actually receive an extra 10 years' income over the span of a 40-year career. Yes, that one sale would be the razor's edge difference, which could catapult you into the big leagues in your chosen career. Milt Campbell's triumph. One individual who discovered the razor's edge difference for himself in his own life is Milton Campbell. You see, Milt went to the Olympic Games in 1952 to compete in the decathlon event. He performed with distinction, finishing in second place in the world, and as a result, he brought home an Olympic silver medal. However, Milt's ambition has always been to win the Olympic gold medal. Therefore, when he returned home, he gave it that old second effort, and he started his training program all over again. For the next 4 years, Milt Campbell dedicated himself single-mindedly to a training schedule, which would culminate with his winning the Olympic gold medal for his country at the 1956 Olympic Games. In the aftermath of that spectacular achievement, I had the pleasure of speaking with Milt on numerous occasions. He often confided to me that many of the athletes against whom he competed in high school were far superior to him at that time. But at some point, they had made the decision to abandon a sports career, and the razor's edge difference for Milt was he kept training. The result, the day they pinned the gold medal on Milt, he was recognized as the best athlete in the entire world. One of the most powerful illustrations of the fine line which separates winning from losing was revealed in the filming of the movie The Razor's Edge itself. The cast for the movie was comprised of 8 principal actors and 8 stand-ins. That is to say, each principal had a stand-in to do the hard, grueling, and tiresome work for him, while the stars did the rest. After the film had been completed, Life magazine published a story in which the pictures of the 8 principals were exhibited on one page, and the 8 stand-ins were shown on the opposite page. The stand-in for the star of the film, Tyrone Power, was a man by the name of Thomas Noonan. Noonan was a close associate of Powers, and they had even attended the same high school at the same time. Both men were about the same size. They were equal in intelligence. They dressed almost identically. They resembled one another very closely, even in their physical appearance. In point of fact, as close a resemblance as was humanly possible existed between each principal actor and his or her stand-in. But in one way, and in one way only, the principal actors and their stand-ins were completely dissimilar. For the combined salaries received by the 8 principals for the picture amounted to what was at that time a staggering $489,000. The combined salaries for the 8 stand-ins, on the other hand, amounted to a paltry $6,534. The principals may only have been slightly more talented than their understudies were, but the monetary compensation which they received was 75 times greater. As your awareness becomes increasingly great with respect to the razor's edge concept, you will be astounded by the number of such examples you encounter every day. As a case in point, just consider how much kindlier you feel towards a particular retail store where the cashier smiles and thanks you for your visit, and then asks you to come back real soon, as compared to the one where you are greeted with a stern, "Well, are you going to buy anything or not?" attitude. Or consider this illustration. Approximately 1 year ago, a family attended one of my seminars in Toronto. They were a truly beautiful family, but they had a serious problem, and they asked me if I could help them solve it. They informed me, to begin with, that they were the owners of an automobile repair shop, but they also explained their business had gone sour. So sour, in fact, that they were seriously contemplating closing their doors and going to work for someone else. In an attempt to assist them, I visited them on the premises of their shop, and I asked them a series of related questions. Then I sat back and listened very carefully to the answers which they provided me with. It wasn't long before I ascertained that whenever I asked a question having to do with their ability as mechanics, they answered with great enthusiasm and literally overflowing with confidence. In fact, they soon had me convinced not only were they very skillful mechanics, but they were exceptionally hard workers as well. On the other hand, however, I also discerned that whenever I asked them a question which touched upon the public relations side of their business, they exhibited absolutely no enthusiasm whatsoever. In fact, an aura of pessimism and despondency actually came over them. It was fairly obvious to me, therefore, the only problem which this family really had was dealing with their own mental attitudes. Once I had identified the exact nature of the problem, I was able to suggest corrective action. I told them they must begin to visualize their shop full of cars which needed to be repaired. I suggested, moreover, that every time they visualize themselves doing work on a car, they also visualize themselves vacuuming the inside of the car, washing the outside, and making sure the windows were spotless. I pointed out to them that because most people don't really understand very much about the mechanical aspects of a car, the only thing which they could notice was how it looked. And since almost everyone feels better driving a car that looks good, these little extra touches would soon start paying great dividends for them. Approximately 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from one of the family members. She told me that none of them quite understood how something so basic could make such a tremendous difference. But nevertheless, they had become so busy in the next 2 weeks since I had visited them. Their only problem now was completing all the work which they had attracted to themselves. The razor's edge difference that changed their business from a loser into a winner turned out to be nothing more dramatic than a hospitable attitude and a few additional touches on each and every automobile. Was it worth it? Just ask the Jacobs family of Toronto, Canada. Most educators will admit, with some coaxing, that the average individual reads at only about a grade 6 or 7 level. The reason for this is we are taught to read by the time we reach grade 6 or 7, and then we never bother to improve our reading skills beyond that point. You should realize, moreover, that what is true about reading is also true about most other skills which we acquire in life. Once people have become proficient in the basics in any particular field, they usually choose to stop learning, and of course, from that point forward, they cease to improve. Since this is true of most people, it follows that it is only the small minority of people in any given field who will go on to become the acknowledged experts in their chosen vocation. Therefore, they are the people who can demand and who will receive the lion's share of the income in their field. Just reflect upon the vast difference in the incomes of the actors in the movie The Razor's Edge. Taking this information into account, consider the job you are doing presently and ask yourself the following questions. How good am I at doing it? And how much better could I be? Realize that if you were to study your chosen field for 1 hour per day, in 5 years' time, you would have studied for 45 40-hour weeks, which amounts to almost a full year of study. Moreover, since you would only be studying for 1 hour at any given time, you would be able to give the material your undivided attention. Therefore, it would actually be the equivalent of a full year of concentrated study. This means that by the end of the first year, you would already have put in 9 40-hour weeks of invaluable study time, although this amounts to only 1 hour of study per day. If you were to follow this schedule rigorously, in a relatively short span of time, you would stand among your peers like a giraffe in a herd of field mice. In fact, when you really think about it, you will soon understand there isn't any competition at all. because there are so few people in the race that even the losers are winners. Therefore, you need not do a tremendous amount of study to gain the understanding you require, because again, the difference between knowledge and ignorance may be as fine as the razor's edge. Let's get down to specifics again. As I have explained to audiences on numerous occasions, I do a great deal of studying by listening to educational tapes while I am driving my car. Therefore, when I suggest that you turn your radio off and your tape recorder on when you get into your car, it could make the difference for you as well. And I know of whence I speak. You should be aware that those people who drive 25,000 miles per year spend 13 40-hour weeks sitting behind the wheel of their car. Therefore, they are in an excellent position to have a wealth of invaluable information deposited in their subconscious minds while they are otherwise engaged in the routine activity of driving. Remember, it is virtually impossible to keep exposing your mind to great ideas without having those ideas expressed in your physical world. Moreover, it is probably only one idea you need to make the difference in your life. Consider this illustration. By merely moving an index finger a fraction of an inch, a person can transform a cold piece of metal into a deadly weapon. Or, by simply shouting the word fire, a person can turn a room full of happy people into a screaming, panic-stricken mob. Obviously, these are both very negative examples. Nevertheless, they do graphically illustrate the important truth that the razor's edge can cut both ways. In other words, since the law of opposites is at work in every aspect of life, it follows that if you are not consciously striving to move across that fine line to improve the quality of your life, you could be inadvertently moving in such a way that your particular position in life is actually starting to backslide. Let me elaborate. A couple of weeks ago, I was doing a talk show on the radio. A lady phoned in, and she was in a fairly negative frame of mind because the reality of her life as she perceived it was far different from what she had dreamed it would be when she was still a student in university. Apparently, at that time, she had dreamed of having an exciting career as a famous author. However, she felt her plans had been ruined because she married shortly after graduation and now had 2 young children to contend with. The children, she explained, were still quite young, and they were, as she described it, under my feet most of the day. She said that due to this circumstance of life, she was unable to go away by herself to write, and this made her feel very resentful towards her family and towards life in general. I suggested to her, however, it was not necessary to go away to write her book, even though it is quite true some writers do go off to some South Sea island just to write. But I assured her these individuals were in the minority, and there are in fact very few authors who devote all their time to writing, or who even earn a major portion of their income while engaged in this activity. I suggested this woman get up 1 hour ahead of the rest of her family, make herself a hot pot of coffee, and sit down and begin to write. Therefore, I continued, there was absolutely nothing preventing her from writing at least 1 page per day. And if she followed this schedule religiously, in a year's time, she would have completed a good-sized book, 365 pages, or possibly 2 or 3 small ones. Yes, just by getting out of bed 1 hour earlier in the morning could be the razor's edge difference which would permit her to realize her dream. Moreover, she would have the additional benefit of having her family near her to provide moral support. First, artificial heart. As I am writing this particular chapter, the media is literally inundating us with stories about the first artificial heart ever to have been placed in the chest of a human patient. The Toronto Daily Star, for example, printed one story a few days ago in which it quoted the chief surgeon for the operation, Dr. William Dufresne. According to the newspaper, he said that his credo with respect to surgery had always been rehearse, rehearse, and then rehearse some more. For if you stick to this principle, he continued, when it comes to perform the actual operation, the procedure will have become almost routine for you. Dr. DeVry is an exemplary case himself of an individual who gave that little bit extra. For he took the time and effort to rehearse the operation on the screen of his own mind before he actually performed it in the hospital operating room. Incidentally, that razor's edge difference has enabled Dr. DeVry to become a world-renowned surgeon who is destined to be written up in the annals of medical history, not to mention the fact that it enabled him to prolong the life of one Dr. Barney Clark. Another excellent illustration of going that extra mile by trying one more time is offered in the same historic event. For Dr. Robert Jarvik, only 36 years of age, and the man who designed the world's first artificial heart, is another prime razor's edge candidate. For you see, Dr. Jarvik is also a man who was rejected at least 3 times by every medical school in the entire United States of America. In fact, he was even advised by one teacher whose course he was failing to apply to dental school. But Robert Jarvik was a man with a vision, and he would not be denied it. He intuitively grasped that he was the master of his fate, and he must have innately understood the razor's edge concept, for he would not accept defeat. As a result of his remarkable perseverance, he was finally accepted into the University of Utah School of Medicine, Salt Lake City, in 1972. A mere decade later, young Robert Jarvik achieved a medical breakthrough, the likes of which has never been seen before. Speaking of her husband, Dr. Jarvik's wife Elaine said, "He has qualities which are very difficult to measure. He is creative, and that is something you cannot measure with a test." Clearly, young Robert Jarvik entered the fierce competition for a place in medical school with none of the conventional assets: superior grades, a prestigious academic degree, and a high score on the medical entrance exam. Nevertheless, he did possess those all-important intangibles, namely perseverance and a consuming passion to be successful. Now, I am in no way suggesting that all of us will one day make medical history. Still, we might resemble Dr. Jarvik in the sense that our particular talents and aptitudes, like his, may not translate well onto standardized tests of ability. Therefore, like Robert Jarvik, it may be necessary for us to bring our particular talents to bear through tenacity, perseverance, and courage, and just one more bite at the apple may be all that is required for us to succeed. Napoleon Hill devoted an entire chapter in his classic book, Think and Grow Rich, to the subject of persistence. He said, "There may be no heroic connotation to the word persistence, but the quality is to the character of man what carbon is to steel." In another part of that same chapter he wrote, "I had the happy privilege of analyzing both Mr. Thomas Edison and Mr. Henry Ford year by year over a long period of years, and therefore the opportunity to study them at close range. Therefore I speak with actual knowledge when I say that I found no quality save persistence in either of them that even remotely suggested the major source of their stupendous achievement." Surely you would have to agree that there was a tremendous difference in the accomplishments of these two men, as compared with the accomplishments of most other people. Yet by their own admission, neither of these men were intellectually superior. In fact, in terms of their IQ, they may actually have been inferior to many other people. Nevertheless, because both men possess the vital quality of persistence, their results in life were invariably superior to those of the masses. Therefore, perhaps the factor which will catapult you into the big leagues, which will multiply your income from a material as well as a psychic point of view, will be your own ability to persist. So the next time you step out to do something and the going gets tough, just remember that the razor's edge difference for you could well be your own ability to persevere. Just try one more time with enthusiasm, and you could watch your accomplishments go from the very ordinary to the very extraordinary. Let me share a brief anecdote from my own experience. To complete this book, I am forming a new habit. Each morning, I get up before everyone else at home, shower, and quickly pour myself a cup of coffee, which I drink on my way to the office. I arrive at the office before 7 a.m., and then I start writing. Since it is absolutely quiet at this hour in the morning, no telephone ringing, no interruptions, I am able to write without any distractions, and I really enjoy it. By the time the other people arrive to begin work, I have several pages already written. So I am then free to get busy with the other work which I have scheduled for the day. Simulation. Now try to relate this story to your own situation for just a moment. For example, if you are employed in a sales capacity, consider the dynamic sales presentation which you could be delivering in a month or two if you did a similar thing each morning. In other words, if instead of writing, as I do, try to simulate a sales presentation with an imaginary prospect or possibly with one of your associates. I use the word simulate rather than role play because the latter usually turns out to be exactly what the word suggests, play, and the exercise often turns into a game. The word simulate, on the other hand, came into popular parlance when we learned how astronauts prepared for their space mission. When they were simulating, they were actually pre-living the in-space experience as if it were already happening. Therefore, I would suggest that if you practiced your sales presentation in a similar manner every morning for 1 or 2 hours, you would witness an incredible improvement in your performance, and in a relatively short span of time. With a year or two of diligent effort under your belt, you would become so proficient you would rarely miss a sale. So remember, if the need is there and the means are there, and you still haven't made the sale, it is probably because you are not good enough yet. A guaranteed way to become good enough is to do what Dr. DeVry prescribed, namely rehearse, rehearse, and then rehearse some more. For in this manner, you will attain the stature of a true professional. And of course, you will receive the compensation a true professional deserves. And although I am only suggesting you set aside an hour per day for preparation, like the actors in Zanuck's movie, you will probably be rewarded many times over. Consider the following account. Several years ago, I was traveling through the southeastern United States with Rudy Michaud, the senior vice president of one of the world's largest insurance companies. Rudy had some papers out that he was working on as we were flying from one city to the next, and I was also busy working on a project. Suddenly, Rudy turned to me and showed me some figures he had written on a sheet of paper. He then pointed out to me there were actually individual salespeople in his company who were earning more money themselves than the combined incomes of the 30 or 40 people who constitute a district sales operation. Do you think these individuals were really 30 or 40 times better than their colleagues? Of course not. For, like the racehorse arm, they were probably only 3 or 4% more effective. But in terms of annual income, there was absolutely no comparison. What made the difference for them? Perhaps they planned their day, while others didn't. Or maybe they practiced for that 1 hour, while the others did not. Nevertheless, whatever it was they did, you can be sure that difference was as fine as a razor's edge. Now stop reading, sit back, relax, and think. Really think. What is it in your life that will make the razor's edge different for you? You know what it is? Good. Then do it now. Chapter 9. Don't think in reverse. Forgive. That slight misdeed of yesterday, why should it mar today? The thing he said, the thing you did, have long since passed away. For yesterday was but a trial. Today you will succeed. And from mistakes of yesterday will come some noble deed. Forgive yourself for thoughtlessness. Do not condemn the past, for it is gone with its mistakes. Their memory cannot last. Forget the failures and misdeeds when such experience rise. Why should you let your head be bowed? Lift up your heart and eyes. Leland Bell Vanderwall said, "Let us not look back in anger, nor forward in fear, but around us in awareness." Don't think in reverse. You will never obtain any substantial measure of material wealth if you insist upon living your life as if you are looking back through the rearview mirror of your automobile. Nevertheless, this seems to be a very common error, which many people have turned into a pernicious habit. That is to say, many of us spend most of our present moments floundering mentally in the time zone of the dead and should-be-forgotten past. Let the dead bury the dead. Remember the old adage which says, "Let the dead bury the dead"? In other words, what you want to do is stop looking back in your life and worrying about things which have already occurred and which you can no longer alter. For pursuing that kind of mental activity will never lead to any worthwhile accomplishment in your life. You should understand, moreover, that all of the great achievers of the past have been visionary figures. They were men and women who projected into the future and did not belabor over things which had already passed. They thought of what could be rather than what already was, and then they moved themselves into action to bring these things into fruition. Think of the magnificent legacy which these forward-thinking individuals have left for us living today. Due to their formidable efforts, we are now able to enjoy breakfast in Paris, lunch in New York, and dinner in Toronto. We are now able to live our lives in brightness and light 24 hours a day if we so desire. We can hear the voice of a loved one on the other side of the ocean merely by pressing some buttons on a telephone. All of these miraculous possibilities and so much more are available to us simply because ordinary human beings like you and me have built extraordinary images on the screen of their mind of things which had never been before. The pioneering spirit of men and women of all faiths, creeds, and colors have been put to great use. Those praiseworthy individuals were able to look into the future to see what could be rather than what already was. And then they ignored those who scoffed and said it couldn't be done. Also understand that all great achievers always expect to do great things. And then they turn around and do them. Do not be misled by your sensory factors. We are, each of us, endowed with the same basic mental tool which the Wrights, the Edisons, the Bells possess. And we all have the God-given ability to employ those tools just as they did. All of us have been blessed with the mental capacity to gaze into the future, to see our lives in a richer and a more satisfying state. Therefore, regardless of the present circumstances in which you find yourself, clearly understand that if you can build the image of something new in your mind, something that far surpasses anything that has occurred up until now, you have the ability to realize that result in the physical world. It could not be more clear that all of us have been born rich in the sense of having a magnificent God-given potential which we owe ourselves to nurture. Just how great is this human potential? Let's check with the experts. Dr. Alexander Rich, professor of biophysics at MIT, has estimated our central nervous system contains from 10 to 100 million cells, each one of which has a storage capacity equal to that of a large computer. If his estimates are even close to being correct, it would imply that the human mind has the capacity to store all of the known information in the world with room to spare. Other specialists in the field of human creativity are similarly convinced that all people have uncharted reservoirs of untapped potential locked up within the confines of their incredible minds. For example, Dr. W. Ross Addy of the Space Biology Laboratory of the Brain Research Institute at UCLA has said that the ultimate creative capacity of your brain may be, for all practical purposes, infinite. One must conclude, therefore, the more a person delves into the potential of the human being, the more that person will become aware of how great he or she truly is. And the more that person becomes aware of his or her own potential, the easier it will be to build images of ideas or things which have never even been contemplated up until the present time. Now pause for just a moment and reflect upon the degree to which you have been utilizing this incredible power to improve the quality of your own life and the lives of those people who surround you. If you know for a fact that you have not been tapping into these great reservoirs of talent and ability, then you should ask yourself very candidly why you have not been. For if you do this, you might just discover that you have been telling yourself for such a long period of time that you can't do certain things that you have actually manufactured a genuine mental block in your own conscious mind. But you should remove these mental blocks by putting yourself into a very relaxed state and by then becoming consciously aware that you can do the things you want to do. You probably just don't know how to go about doing them. If this is the position which you currently find yourself in, then you should start getting excited, for the ideas which are being brought to you in the pages of this book will show you exactly how to go about doing the things you most wish to do. Also, please be advised, you do not need to feel regret because you have not fully utilized this great power in the past. For the truth is, there are few people anywhere who understand the real truth concerning their own hidden resources. That is the very reason why so few people live dynamic, exciting lives, and so many people live confused, unproductive lives. Moreover, just on the basis of what you have read up to this point, you have already far surpassed most other people with respect to your understanding of this important potential. It would appear to be the case that the masses of people have always lived their lives in the past tense. That is to say, by virtue of holding on to old images, they have limited themselves to only half a life. Indeed, even as far back as the turn of the century, William James, 1842 to 1910, one of the world's most distinguished early psychologists, reached the conclusion the average individual was using only a small portion of his or her real potential, perhaps as little as 10%. He considered this to be one of his most important psychological discoveries, and in this connection he wrote, "Most people live, whether physically, intellectually, or morally, in a very restricted circle of their potential being. They make use of a very small portion of their possible consciousness and of their soul's resources in general, much like a person who out of their whole bodily organism should get into the habit of using and moving only their little finger." One might have expected that in this modern age in which we now live, James's findings would have become anachronistic. But unfortunately, this is just not true. For the sad reality is that most of us are continuing to live our lives in much the same manner as our grandparents did. The reason we do this, you will be interested to know, is that most of us have never been trained to measure our true abilities correctly. Indeed, during the formative years of our lives, we have been inculcated with the belief that our results in school would be the factor determining whether we would win or lose in life. This notion has been fired at us from virtually every conceivable angle, until eventually most of us have not only come to accept it intellectually, but we have actually become emotionally involved with the idea as well. The result is, the lives of untold numbers of individuals have been needlessly sacrificed on the altar of failure. I feel time has come for us to free ourselves from these mental shackles of the past. Let us therefore begin this healing process by getting in touch with a wide variety of beautiful images which we have the ability to form on the screen of our own minds. Then let us begin to actually expect to receive the physical manifestation of each one of these images in our own lives. Remember, if we are able to see ourselves doing, being, or having something on the screen of our conscious minds, then we are able to do, be, or have it on the physical plane of our life as well. You see, the adage is true. What you see is what you get. Therefore, always look forward into the bright future which lies just ahead of where you currently are situated. Let me make it clear that I am not referring in this context to the things which you can actually see with your physical sense of sight, that is, looking at what was or is. Rather, I am referring to your creative inner eye, which enables you to see what can be. The creative inner eye is that magnificent part of your personality which permits you to see into the vast reaches of the creative, non-physical world. This is the area where all life begins or originates. The past, conversely, is the place where all life ends. But unfortunately, it is also the place where 95% of the people spend 95% of their time, which is sadly also their life. For example, it is an accepted ritual in our culture for old friends to spend hours upon hours reminiscing or harping back on the good old days of yesteryear. Hours upon wasted hours of precious, pleasant living time is squandered, discussing people who are dead and gone, or reflecting upon things which used to be, but are no more. In fact, there are actually numerous individuals who spend their days collecting things from the past, or antiques, as they are sometimes called. These people collect everything from old matchboxes to antique furniture. Then, there is another large category of people who consume the majority of their waking hours reliving in their minds past negative events which have occurred in their lives. They either spend valuable hours thinking of some past injustice which someone has done to them, or possibly about some unkind remark which someone had once directed in their direction. They bemoan and agonize over past failures or missed opportunities which they somehow let slip through their fingers. Unfortunately for them, these individuals maintain such a negative vibration that there is not even the most remote possibility of a positive thought entering their level of consciousness. Indeed, the only thing this type of thinking will ever create is resentment and or guilt, both deadly emotional states. But until these poor souls come to terms with the fact that it is they themselves who have been the authors of their own misfortune, and until they realize it is up to them to alter the course of their own lives, they are doomed to repeat their past failures over and over again. As long as they persist in believing that others are the cause of their problems, they cannot be successful, because of course you can never successfully change anyone but yourself. Therefore, to the extent that these people hold on to their false beliefs, they will continue to think in reverse. And it goes without saying that you cannot move ahead while your mind is traveling in the opposite direction. Take a good look at yourself. Could you be one of the individuals whom I have just portrayed? If you are, I would strongly suggest that you bring your mind to a screeching halt. Then reevaluate your present position and re-examine your future goals. Look straight ahead and fill your consciousness with great and grand thoughts of what you ultimately could do and what you eventually can be. Become acutely aware of the direction your mind is traveling, because ultimately, that is the way your life is going to unfold. Polaroid camera analogy. I have often likened the human mind and the material world to a Polaroid camera and a photograph. For once you have snapped a picture, the course for that photograph has been incontrovertibly set. There is a short gestation period which must elapse, but then the photograph must begin to appear, and it will do so exactly as it had originally been shot. To carry our analogy one step further, I would suggest that the shutter of the camera is quite like the conscious mind, in that it is responsible for snapping the picture. Similarly, the camera itself may be likened to the subconscious mind, because it is responsible for doing the work. Finally, the photograph is analogous to your results, as it merely shows the world the physical replica of the picture which you have already taken with your mind. Clearly, if you were to take a picture of the same object over and over again, you would do nothing more than reproduce the same photograph, over and over again. Yet this is precisely the course which many people set for their own lives. Therefore, you must constantly be reminding yourself that if you persist in thinking in reverse, you will only reproduce the same results in your life over and over again. If you wish to change this pattern, on the other hand, you must look bravely into the bright future which lies ahead and see yourself already doing what you now only dream about doing someday. Patty's cruise. Patty Moyer first came to our seminar with her parents when she was only 11 years old. By the age of 15, she was already speaking in the seminar and sharing with the audience the manner in which a concept in the seminar had moved her from failing miserably in French at school to honors grades, and in a relatively short period of time to boot. 5 years later, she was working with me in the seminar business. One day I noticed her attitude seemed to be slipping badly, and it appeared to me that she was not enjoying herself one iota. Note that those are the first telltale symptoms of an individual who is without a goal. So I asked her what it was she really wanted, and her immediate response was, "What do you mean by that?" I explained to her that since she wasn't working towards anything, she didn't have anything to look forward to, and this made life extremely difficult, to say the least. Then she said, "But I don't have any money, so I can't do anything." I reminded her, however, that it doesn't cost even 1 penny to want or to dream. A radiant smile suddenly came across Patty's face, and she told me that what she wanted more than anything else was to go on a South Sea cruise. I said to her that would probably be a lot of fun. I told her I had done it a number of times myself, and I described to her how beautiful it was. I also expressed my expectation that she would have a truly marvelous time. I pointed out, moreover, that she would retain the memories from that trip for the rest of her life, and she could then relive them over and over again whenever she desired it. At this juncture, I asked her what was holding her back. Again, the same response was forthcoming from Patty. "I don't have any money." This type of negative thinking had been crippling her by preventing her from undertaking something in her life which she felt was very important. But the real reason I bring this story up here is to illustrate that even though Patty was mature, had no ties, and had no real reason not to go on the trip, her own thinking was holding her back from doing so. Clearly, she was a young lady who was thinking in reverse. She had thoroughly convinced herself it was a lack of finances which thwarted her desire. But of course, that just wasn't the case. Nevertheless, whatever the source of her real frustration may have been, it was certainly holding her back from realizing her dream. Understand that untold numbers of people are making the same error Patty made daily, and it is a great tragedy. Perhaps you have been making this same error in your own life. If you have, I hope Patty's story will be the inspiration you need to get you moving in the direction you wish to go. In any case, one day Patty and I went to lunch together, and we had a very serious discussion. I said, "Listen, Patty, if you really want to go on a cruise, you must quit looking back or looking at what is, because looking at present results is a very common form of thinking in reverse. You must commence to look ahead, and you must start applying what we profess in the seminars. So go ahead and book your trip, make definite plans, and don't give one thought to anything going wrong. Know that whatever you need for your goal to materialize will begin to be attracted to you as soon as you accept the idea that you are going and make definite plans to do so. If it is money that you need, you will have it. It might not all be in place until the very last moment, but if you see it and you believe it and you expect it, you most certainly will receive it." I won't bore you with the details of how things all came together, but I will tell you they came together in wondrous and unexpected ways. Eventually, Patty actually attracted more money than she required for her trip. I was at the airport at approximately 6 a.m. with Patty's parents on the morning that she left, and it was a tremendously gratifying experience for me to see her face aglow with nervous excitement. Suffice it to say, she went on her cruise. She had enough courage to travel alone, and she enjoyed a trip which she will surely remember all the days of her life. But what is even more important than the trip itself is the awareness Patty gained from her experience. For she now knows through her own personal experience that if you think in reverse, you will only see reasons why you can't. However, if you will but look into the future with a positive, even expectant attitude, you will see that you can do. Patty will be able to apply this awareness towards the achievement of all her future wishes. Have you been dreaming of a trip? If you have, go out and book your reservations. It doesn't matter if the reservations are for 6 months or a year from now. Make them immediately, and then enjoy the anticipation which precedes the actual event. I honestly believe that in Patty's particular case, the excitement leading up to her trip was equally as enjoyable and exciting as the actual trip itself, not to mention the enjoyment which she will derive from the memories of her trip, which she will carry with her for the rest of her life. The probable reason that so few people make plans or set goals similar to the one discussed above is that most people are unable, in their own mind, to figure out how everything necessary will come together. But you must understand, you need not know how everything will come together. All you have to understand is the underlying principle by which your good comes. Namely, everything which you receive in life comes by virtue of the law of attraction. The Paul Hutsey story in chapter 3 is an excellent example of a conscientious, intelligent, hard-working person who was attempting to do something which was tantamount to a person jumping off the front porch of his home and then expecting somehow to land on the roof. You know that this is never going to happen, yet Paul had spent 20 years. 1. Letting the sales sheet in his office control the image that he held of his operation. And 2. Attempting to improve the results he was getting through sheer force of will, dogged determination, and long, hard hours of agonizing toil. Everybody, by doing all of these things, certainly will improve their results to some degree, but they will never witness a dramatic improvement in their results until they have first altered the image which they are holding in their mind's eye. Paul Hutsey is a prime illustration of a person who fully believed he was looking ahead, when in actual fact he was guilty of thinking almost completely in reverse. For he spent the vast majority of his time consciously focusing on pleasant results, pleasant thoughts, and pleasant images. If you have been guilty of allowing your sales sheets, your bank account, or the x-rays the doctor takes of your body control the way you feel, think, or view your sales, financial position, or health, I can assure you that just as certain as it's going to get dark tonight, there will not be any marked improvement in your life in any of these areas. On the other hand, however, if you will let the present physical results serve only as an indication of the images which you have been holding in the past, and then proceed by virtue of your own higher mental faculties to look into the bright future and to build an image of the good that you desire, just as Paul and Patty did, you will see your image materialize. But again, as long as you continue to let your present or past results control your thinking process, you will never live to see your dreams come true. Therefore, look up, look ahead, and form the image of the life you choose to live. Then everything you touch or come in contact with will grow and expand and express itself in a greater and a greater way. Individuals who are thinking in reverse very rarely, if ever, originate ideas which lead them to providing meaningful service to others. The reason for this is that they are only able to see what someone else has already done. As a result of their limited mindset, the rewards which they will ultimately receive in life are destined to be equally limited. Chapter 10, The Vacuum Law of Prosperity. Giving, by Arthur William Beer. To get he had tried, yet his store was still meager. To a wise man he cried in a voice keen and eager, "Pray tell me, How may I successfully live? And the wise man replied, to get, you must give. As to giving, he said, what have I to give? I've scarce enough bread, and of course one must live. But I would partake of life's bountiful store. Came the wise man's response, then you must give more. The lesson he learned to get was forgotten. Toward mankind he turned with a love new begotten. As he gave of himself in useful living, then joy found his days, for he grew rich in giving. The vacuum law of prosperity. Nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. Dedicated to Aunt Marg. I must dedicate this chapter to my Aunt Marg in appreciation of her childlike faith in and her profound understanding of this most magnificent law which governs one's prosperity. Even today, it is very seldom that I visit her without her expressing her heartfelt gratitude to me for having taught her this great truth about the vacuum law of prosperity. As a consequence of her acquiring that knowledge, Marg and her entire family today enjoy many of the comforts of life, which they had heretofore simply been unable to experience. Moreover, the simple truth is, they would still not be enjoying these finer things in life if it were not for the fact that she had gained her new awareness. Although Marg happens to be my aunt, she is only a few years older than I am, and we have been very good friends since our childhood days. I love Marg and her entire family very deeply. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that I have derived a great degree of satisfaction from sharing the ideas contained in this chapter with Marg and her family over the years. It has been a particular joy for me to have had the opportunity of witnessing them apply this new knowledge in such a way that today they are living their lives in an entirely new way. Marg's first introduction to this dynamic law dates back approximately 10 years, to a time when she and her family were attending a series of seminars which I was conducting on the subject of prosperity. Soon after the seminars had been completed, I visited Marg at her home. She and her husband Don and I were discussing many ideas, all of which had to do with the subject of prosperity. At some point during the course of our discussion, the issue of their home was raised. Marg looked at her living room, became visibly upset, and angrily proclaimed that she was sick and tired of living the way they had been living. She then pointed to the curtains in her living room and said, "You know something? I absolutely detest those old drapes." I smiled at her and replied, "No, you don't, Marg. You love them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have kept them so close to you." I continued, "For the only things we have in our life are those things that we love or are in harmony with." Marg told me that she had a difficult time accepting the idea that she could actually be in love with something she found so utterly displeasing. By this point, Dawn was thoroughly convinced that we had both gone off our rocker. Marg for even attempting to understand what I had been explaining, and me for actually believing it. Nevertheless, I continued with my explanation, and I informed them that if a person remains continually in close proximity with something, be it another person or object, it can only be because the person is in harmonious vibration with them or it. The reason I could say this, I explained, was that love is just another word for resonance or harmonious vibration. I told them, finally, that what I had just stated was a law of the universe. Whether or not they fully understood it or even believed it made absolutely no difference whatsoever. I explained to Marg that if it was true she really did detest the drapes as she claimed she did, she would already have taken them down, had them cleaned, and given them away to the crippled civilians, the Salvation Army, St. Vincent de Paul, or some charity that would have been able to put them to good use. Don looked at me in a state of bewilderment. Then he firmly asserted that she's not taking those drapes down because we have nothing to replace them with, nor can we afford to purchase a replacement. I can remember saying to him in reply, "Don, please understand, you will never hang new drapes or new curtains until you have first made a space for them. Indeed," I continued, "the real secret behind the vacuum law of prosperity lies in the fact that by giving the old drapes away, you would automatically have been making room for the new. In other words, you can't get something until you are first willing to give something away. Bear in mind, however, that giving means letting go of completely or totally abandoning to another. Clearly, this is an extremely difficult concept for a person who is solely attached to the material world to even comprehend, let alone practice. We discussed the information summarized above for a while longer, and then Marg moved herself into action. She began by taking down the living room drapes, which she had looked at in anger for so many years. By doing this, she was immediately ridding herself of the source of so many years of frustration. For every time she looked at or even thought about those drapes, a very negative image would instantly flash across the screen of her mind. She would then move herself into a negative vibration and therefore begin to attract more of what she did not want into her life. As she started removing the drapes from their hooks, Dawn came very near to exploding in a fit of rage. Nevertheless, Marg would not back down, even in the face of this tremendous opposition, and she continued to act on the idea which I had planted in her mind. Dawn's response at this point was to say, well, I guess we're going to have to buy some new ones now, whether I like it or not. I then explained to them that they should not worry about how they would obtain the new drapes at this juncture. The important thing was that they would soon have what they needed. The reason this was so, I explained, is not really all that difficult to comprehend. Reduced to its most simple level, we can say that people will soon become tired of living their lives in a fishbowl. For a little while, Dawn and Marg lived without any drapes hanging on their windows. But then one day I visited their home, and sure enough, Marg had the drapes which she wanted, and she had them right where she wanted them. Little by little, the awareness of this great truth had begun to creep into her consciousness. It wasn't long after this that there was no furniture left in their living room. Marg had become tired of living with it after so many years, so she simply gave it away. By doing so, she automatically created the space she required for the good which she desired. Soon their entire home had been completely refurnished and redecorated, and now she has it just the way she wants it. A few days ago, my wife and I were visiting Dawn and Marg in their home. As we were driving away, Linda said to me, "Their home really looks nice, doesn't it?" I couldn't help but smile, knowing the background and having been an integral part of the many battles which had taken place each time something else had been given away. The last time I spoke to Marg on the telephone, she said, "Isn't it incredible what a tremendous difference a little bit of knowledge can make in your life? You only have to learn a little bit to receive so much." That statement is oh so true, for a little bit of awareness does make a tremendous difference in results. Therefore ask yourself, what do you have lying around you that you really don't like? Then ask yourself, why don't you just package it up and give it away, and thereby make space for the good that you really do desire. Remember, this law which I have been discussing applies to every aspect of your life. On numerous occasions during the course of my seminars, I have discussed this law. I have explained to audiences that although almost everyone likes to have new clothes, most people have no room in their closet for hanging any new clothes. In fact, when you hang something in your closet, you probably have to push other clothes aside just to fit another hanger on the bar. The irony is, however, that many of the clothes that are hanging in your closet you probably don't even wear. In saying this, I am well aware that some of your clothes may have been expensive, so you are rather reluctant to dispose of them. However, you know as well as I do that some of the clothes which you have hanging in your closet are hanging there simply because they don't feel comfortable to you when you do put them on. There is something about them that you do not like. Therefore, I would strongly suggest you simply give them away. By doing this, you will automatically be making room for the new clothes which are inevitably going to follow. Set the following project for yourself, and then carry it out right now. Check your clothes closet very carefully, as if with a fine-tooth comb, and then remove all of the clothes you no longer wear. Once you have done this, simply give them away. By doing this, you will thereby create a vacuum or void. Moreover, since nature abhors a vacuum, it will only be a relatively short period of time before your closet is once again full of clothes. Only this time, however, it will be full of the clothes that you really do want to wear. The process which I have been alluding to herein is a never-ending one. Therefore, it is something which you should plan to practice all the days of your life. In other words, you must continually be making space for the good which you desire. Keep this information constantly in the forefront of your mind, for the crucial element in this vacuum law of prosperity is that you must let go of the old before you will ever make room for the new. Another word of caution: never sell the articles which you no longer want. Just give them away. I realize this advice might run contrary to the way in which you have been conditioned to live your life, but you must understand that in giving, you will also be receiving. On the other hand, however, if you sell the articles, the money which you receive for them will be all that you will get in the bargain. This may sound like a rather peculiar approach to take, but it is nonetheless the proper one. Please understand, moreover, you can never give too much of anything. Nevertheless, when you do give, fully expect to receive something in return. Very rarely will you receive from that source to which you gave, but receive you must, just as surely as rain must fall when two clouds collide. Therefore, gaining a good grounding in this universal law will be a great personal benefit to you. Remember also that you are not working with specific individuals or with specific things. Rather, you are dealing with an infinite power which operates in a very exact way. As a consequence, whenever we wish to receive anything new into our life, we must trigger the process by making room for it. This law applies not only to our physical world, but also to our mental domain. So understand that whenever we wish to entertain new ideas, we must first be willing to let go of or to challenge some of our old ones. Unfortunately, there is a very large segment of the population which has an exceedingly difficult time achieving this end. Because of this, these troubled individuals often entertain opposing or contradictory ideas at one and the same time. They live their entire lives in a state of oscillation, thinking, do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it, etc. This mental state is commonly referred to as indecision, and it leads to considerable mental anguish and confusion. Be aware that indecision or confusion can be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, cause of people being held back from accomplishing great things in their lives. Why we hold on to the old? Why is it that we hold on so strongly to old ideas or to old things? I have no doubt that you will agree this is an intriguing question. In fact, it is so intriguing that if you were to ask 1,000 different people this same question, you would probably obtain enough answers to fill a book. Unfortunately, however, almost all of the answers which you would receive would be dealing with the secondary causes and not the primary one of this horrendous problem. But if we were to go directly to the primary cause of the problem, we would soon discover that although it lies deep within each individual, it is virtually the same for everyone. Let me not hold you in suspense any longer. The answer to the question would be as follows. We hold on to old ideas and old things because we lack faith in our ability to obtain new ideas and new things. This, of course, leads to a condition of insecurity, which stems at its root from an inability to understand who and what you are, and a lack of awareness of your true relationship with the infinite power will always leave you with a distorted image of yourself. Therefore, you must reach the point where you realize that your true self knows no limits, that in truth, you are quite capable of having, doing, or being virtually anything you desire to be. But when individuals fail to appreciate this basic truth, when they are honestly convinced that their supply is limited and that their real security lies in money or things, they will be afraid to try anything new. Indeed, it takes no great wisdom to understand that they will want to hold on to what they already have, and then they will want to accumulate even more of the same. If you so desire, you may put this vacuum law of prosperity to a very simple and practical test yourself. Just take an ordinary cup of water and set it on a table or on your desk. Then ask yourself whether you are able to put anything else where that cup rests. The answer, of course, is that you cannot, at least not until you remove the cup. Moreover, the same principle exactly holds true with respect to a piece of furniture. Therefore, as long as your sofa sits where it is presently sitting, you cannot put a new sofa in its place. Similarly, as long as your clothes hang where they are hanging, you cannot put new clothes in their place. The identical principle is also applicable in the realm of ideas. For example, if you have one idea in your mind suggesting you should be traveling east, and then all of a sudden another idea pops into your mind suggesting you should be traveling west, it goes without saying that you will be placed in a serious bind. For there is absolutely no way that you can travel in both directions simultaneously. Clearly, it is absolutely essential that you let go of one idea before you can move yourself into action on the other. The reason for this, as we have already stated, is that nature truly abhors a vacuum. Therefore, if you sincerely desire to receive something which is new, you must first make room for it by ridding yourself of that which is old. This is an ironclad law of life, and yet you might encounter one person in 1,000 who truly understands it. Nevertheless, when you do encounter that one person in 1,000, you will see before you someone who not only lives in extreme comfort today, but someone who is also moving ahead in life each day and at a fairly rapid rate of speed. So put the law to the test in your own life. Use the ideas contained in the various chapters of this book, and you will find that the law works every time. It never fails. Remove the kinks from your mind. Spirit never expresses itself other than perfectly. Therefore, whatever imperfection does exist, it is always the result of our individual or collective modes of thinking. Since this is true, it is not necessary that you hold on to anything for fear of losing it. In fact, the truth is you will never truly enjoy anything you must hold on to, because freedom in all areas of your life is absolutely essential if you are to grow into the truly great human being who you are quite capable of one day becoming. Stated slightly differently, we can say that energy must flow through you freely without any obstructions if you are to achieve the good which you desire. At this point, you may be asking yourself, what are these obstructions that I have been referring to? Let me list some of them for you for your edification. They include doubt, guilt, resentment, and any thought of lack or limitation. They include any negative ideas which have a tendency to block the flow of creative energy to and through you. For example, you might very well be attempting to get a beautiful image in your mind which would cause you to feel wonderful, and yet because of these inhibitors, as they are sometimes called, you end up with nothing but frustration. Your problem, whether you realize it or not, is that you haven't created the space for the beautiful image which you are trying to create. Therefore, you must resolve yourself to letting go of these obstructions to enable you to make space for the good which you desire. You should visualize your body as being an instrument through which a non-physical creative energy flows. You should then liken it to an ordinary garden hose, which you may be using to water the garden at the back of your home. Suppose for a moment that you decide to water the flower bed in the front of your home. In order to accomplish this, you must drag the hose to the front of the house. But while you are dragging it, suppose that you form a loop in the hose, and as you pull on it, unbeknownst to you, it kinks. Clearly, although there is an abundance of water at the source, the water will just be trickling out of the hose, a drop at a time, onto the flower bed. The reason for this is that the kink is obstructing the flow of the water, which could, if it were allowed to flow freely, actually breathe new life into the plants. In a similar manner, these negative concepts which you hold in your mind are obstructing the flow of energy which could, if it were given a chance to, breathe new life into you and into your results in life. In the case of the garden hose, you would immediately investigate to find the cause of the interrupted flow of water. Once you found the kink, you would then proceed to remove it, so the water could resume flowing freely in a steady stream. Now be aware of this. The process that I have described for the garden hose is exactly the same process that you must undertake yourself with respect to your marvelous mind. That is to say, you must let go of all of the obstructions that are hampering you. Release the mental kinks, and you will immediately find that there is no lack of creative energy at the source. In truth, there never has been any, and there never will be any. The mental kinks, which you have carelessly and very likely unconsciously built, are what are actually limiting the flow of the life-giving power which ultimately transform your life into results. Each chapter in this book highlighted various concepts which you must begin to use if you are to enjoy the benefits that may be derived by simply permitting this power to flow freely through you. You have now read the entire book. I would like to suggest, therefore, that you go back to the beginning of the book to compare the results you are presently obtaining in your life with the results you could obtain were you to make proper use of each idea. Study each chapter very seriously, but in a relaxed state, and keep acting on each idea until it becomes a fixed part of your personality. Remember, regardless of how the results of your life may presently appear to you, you have truly been born rich. For God's gift to you is more talent and ability than you will ever use in one lifetime. Your gift to God is to develop and utilize as much of that talent and ability as you can in this lifetime. The beginning.
I hope you enjoyed this video. We put a lot of good information up here, and it causes everything in your life to get better. If you'd like us to notify you every time we put a new video up, hit subscribe and then turn on notifications. Check out all our videos, and we will notify you when we put a new one up.